1962. Cinecittà Studios, Rome, Set 5. Morning light. Richard Burton arrived at the set that morning with absolute confidence. His sports car pulled up to the studio gates, and he removed his sunglasses, checking himself in the mirror. He was handsome, talented, one of the finest theater actors in the world. Hollywood needed him, not the other way around. He'd only joined the Cleopatra project for money, $150,000. With that, he'd return to London and do real theater. Elizabeth Taylor, he'd heard the name, of course. The most beautiful woman in the world, they said. Richard had shrugged. Beauty wasn't talent. The set assistant led him to the area where Elizabeth would be filming. Miss Taylor is shooting her big scene today, Mr. Burton. The death of Caesar. The director specifically invited you to watch. Richard crossed his arms and stood at the edge of the set. There was a mocking light in his eyes. Let's see what this Hollywood star can do, he thought. But 10 minutes later, Richard Burton's arrogant posture had collapsed. His hands were trembling. His heart was pounding. He couldn't breathe because Elizabeth Taylor was delivering the most powerful performance Richard had ever witnessed. And for the first time in his life, Richard was watching someone more talented than himself. But to understand why those 4 words Richard would say in 10 minutes would change everything, we need to go back. Back to the crisis that brought Richard Burton to Rome in the first place. Before we continue this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you the untold secrets and defining moments of Hollywood's greatest legends. Your support helps us preserve these stories for generations to come. 6 months earlier, Richard Burton had been in crisis. Not a career crisis, his career was flourishing. Not a financial crisis, he was making more money than ever. It was a crisis of meaning. Richard stood on the stage of the Old Vic Theatre in London, performing Hamlet to a packed house, and felt absolutely nothing. The applause washed over him like water off stone. The reviews praised him as brilliant, transcendent, the greatest actor of his generation. But Richard read those words, and they meant nothing, because he knew a secret. He wasn't brilliant. He was a fraud. Richard had grown up in Pontrhydyfen, Wales, the 12th of 13 children in a coal mining family. His father was an alcoholic. His mother died when he was 2. Richard had escaped poverty through his voice, that magnificent Welsh voice that could recite Shakespeare and make audiences weep. But he'd never escaped the feeling of being an imposter. No matter how many stages he conquered, how many critics praised him, how many awards he won, Richard still felt like the poor Welsh boy pretending to be something he wasn't. His marriage to Sybil Williams had become another performance. They'd been together for 12 years, had 2 daughters, presented the perfect image of theatrical royalty. But Richard knew the truth. He didn't love Sybil the way a husband should love a wife. He respected her, appreciated her loyalty, valued her support. But passion, fire, the kind of love that consumed you, that was missing. And Richard was beginning to understand that without that consuming passion, life was just going through motions, repeating lines, wearing costumes. When the offer came to play Mark Antony in Cleopatra for $150,000, Richard's first instinct was to refuse. Hollywood films were beneath him, commercial garbage for the masses. But his agent convinced him, "Richard, you need money for the girl's education. You need to secure your future. Do this one film, take the money, and you'll never have to worry again." So Richard agreed, not because he wanted to, but because it was practical, sensible, the kind of decision a responsible father and husband makes. He'd heard about Elizabeth Taylor, of course. Everyone had. She was the highest-paid actress in the world, getting $1 million for Cleopatra. The production was a disaster, already millions over budget, plagued by delays and scandals. Elizabeth had nearly died from pneumonia the previous year. She'd had an emergency tracheotomy, and there was still a visible scar in her throat. The media called her difficult, demanding, a diva. Richard had read these reports with disdain. Another Hollywood princess who confused fame with talent. Richard's first day on the Cleopatra set was chaos. Hundreds of extras in Roman costumes, massive sets recreating ancient Alexandria, cameras and lights everywhere. Director Joseph Mankiewicz greeted Richard with a knowing smile. "Welcome to the circus, Richard. Ready to meet the ringmaster?" Richard didn't understand the reference until Mankiewicz led him to where Elizabeth Taylor was preparing for her scene. Yeah, she was smaller than Richard expected. On screen, Elizabeth seemed larger than life, but in person she was petite, almost fragile looking. She wore Cleopatra's costume, gold and white silk, elaborate Egyptian makeup. But what struck Richard wasn't her beauty. It was her intensity. Even before the cameras rolled, Elizabeth was different. She wasn't chatting with crew members or checking her makeup. She sat alone, eyes closed, breathing deeply, preparing. "That's the death of Caesar scene," Mankiewicz explained quietly. "Elizabeth's been preparing for this moment for weeks. It's the emotional center of the film. Cleopatra's world is destroyed, and she has to carry that devastation." Richard nodded, his arms still crossed, his expression still skeptical. "We'll see," he said. The cameras began rolling. Elizabeth, as Cleopatra, entered the scene where Caesar's body lay, and in that moment something extraordinary happened. Elizabeth didn't act grief. She embodied it. Her voice cracked with genuine pain. Her tears were real. Her hands shook as she reached for Caesar's face. Richard, watching from 30 feet away, felt his breath catch. This wasn't performance, this was truth. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. What Richard didn't know, and what no one on that set knew except Elizabeth herself, was that she wasn't acting Cleopatra's grief. She was reliving her own. When Elizabeth looked at Caesar's body, she saw Mike Todd. Her third husband, the love of her life, had died in a plane crash in 1958. Elizabeth was supposed to be on that plane, but stayed behind because of a cold. The guilt had never left her. Why did Mike die? Why did she live? These questions haunted her every day. After Mike's death, Elizabeth had spiraled. She'd married Eddie Fisher in a scandal that destroyed his marriage to Debbie Reynolds, Elizabeth's best friend. The public called Elizabeth a home wrecker, a husband stealer. The hate mail poured in. Death threats arrived daily. Elizabeth started drinking heavily, taking pills to sleep, more pills to wake up. Yet by the time she started filming Cleopatra, she was barely holding herself together. So when she played Cleopatra mourning Caesar, Elizabeth wasn't pretending. She was opening old wounds, letting real pain pour out. And Richard Burton, the skeptical theater actor who thought Hollywood stars were all surface and no substance, was witnessing genuine emotional devastation. Richard's hands started shaking. He uncrossed his arms. His throat felt tight, because he recognized what he was seeing. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a beautiful face, she was a fellow sufferer, someone who understood pain, loss, the feeling of being broken and having to perform wholeness. Someone like him. The scene lasted 12 minutes. When Mankiewicz finally called cut, the entire set was silent. Elizabeth remained on her knees, tears still streaming down her face. The crew, these hardened film professionals who'd seen everything, were wiping their eyes. One of the cameramen was openly crying. Richard stood frozen. His skepticism had shattered. His arrogance had evaporated. He was trembling, actually physically shaking. Mankiewicz noticed and walked over. "What did you think, Richard?" Richard couldn't speak. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mankiewicz waited. Finally, Richard managed to turn his head toward the director. His face was pale. His eyes were wide with something between shock and recognition, and he whispered 4 words that would change 2 lives forever. "I have to have her." Mankiewicz's expression changed immediately, because he understood what Richard meant. This wasn't admiration for a fellow actor. This wasn't professional respect. This was obsession. This was a man looking at a woman and seeing his destiny. And Mankiewicz, who'd been directing films for decades, knew exactly what this meant. Disaster. Have you ever seen someone and instantly known your life would never be the same? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What happened next unfolded with the inevitability of Greek tragedy. Richard couldn't stay away from Elizabeth. He found excuses to visit her dressing room, to discuss scenes they'd be filming together, to simply be near her. Elizabeth, for her part, noticed Richard immediately. She'd heard about his reputation, the brilliant Welsh actor who considered Hollywood beneath him. She expected arrogance and was prepared to dislike him. But when Richard looked at her, Elizabeth saw something unexpected, understanding. Their first real conversation happened 3 days after the Caesar scene. Richard knocked on Elizabeth's dressing room door during a break. When she opened it, he stood there holding 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might want this," he said. His voice, that magnificent voice, was gentle. Elizabeth smiled and let him in. They talked for 2 hours. About theater, about film, about Wales and London and Hollywood, about feeling like frauds despite success, about the crushing weight of fame, about loneliness in crowded rooms. Elizabeth told Richard about Mike Todd, about the guilt that never left her. Richard told Elizabeth about his Welsh childhood, about feeling like he was always performing, even in his own marriage. They recognized each other in a way that was immediate and total. This wasn't love at first sight. This was 2 damaged people finding someone who spoke their language, but both were married, Richard to Sybil, who'd supported him through years of poverty and struggle, Elizabeth to Eddie Fisher, who'd abandoned his family for her. The moral weight of what they were beginning to feel should have stopped them, but it didn't, because what Richard and Elizabeth had found in each other was bigger than morality, bigger than marriage vows, bigger than consequences. They'd found recognition. And once you've been truly seen, everything else becomes negotiable. The affair started slowly, then consumed them completely. A touch of hands during a scene rehearsal, lingering looks across the set, conversations that stretched late into the night. Then, inevitably, a kiss. It happened in Elizabeth's dressing room. Late one evening, when everyone else had gone home, Richard had come to discuss the next day's shooting schedule. Elizabeth poured wine. They sat close. The air between them was electric. And then Richard leaned forward and kissed her. Elizabeth kissed him back. And in that moment, 2 marriages effectively ended. Not legally, not officially, but spiritually. Because Richard and Elizabeth had crossed a line, and neither of them wanted to go back. The affair became the worst-kept secret in Rome. Paparazzi camped outside both their hotels. Reporters wrote breathless articles about the scandal of the century. Sybil Burton flew to Rome to try to save her marriage. Eddie Fisher confronted Richard, demanding he stay away from Elizabeth. The Cleopatra producers threatened to shut down production. The Vatican condemned the affair as erotic vagrancy. But Richard and Elizabeth didn't care. They were lost in each other, consumed by a passion neither had experienced before. They fought, constantly, jealous rages that ended in passionate reconciliations. They drank together, sometimes starting at breakfast. They read poetry to each other, discussed philosophy, challenged each other intellectually. This wasn't just physical attraction. This was 2 brilliant, tortured souls finding completion in each other. Richard wrote in his diary, "She is a wildly exciting love mistress. She is beautiful beyond dreams. Her breasts are apocalyptic. They would topple empires. But more than that, she is intelligent, funny, and understands me in ways no one else ever has." Elizabeth told friends, "Richard makes me feel seen. Not as Elizabeth Taylor, the movie star, but as me. The scared girl who lost too many people, the woman who doesn't know how to be loved without destroying everything. He sees all of it and loves me anyway." But passion always has a price. Sybil Burton returned to London heartbroken and humiliated. She would eventually divorce Richard, taking half his fortune. Eddie Fisher's career collapsed. The man who'd been one of America's most popular singers became a punchline, the cuckold who lost his wife to Richard Burton. Elizabeth's children were caught in the scandal, photographed by paparazzi, exposed to their mother's choices. Richard's daughters barely saw their father for months as he remained in Rome with Elizabeth. The Cleopatra production became the most expensive film ever made, ballooning to $44 million, largely because of delays caused by the Burton-Taylor affair. Mankiewicz, the director, suffered a heart attack from the stress. The studio executives considered shutting down production multiple times. When the film was finally released in 1963, it lost money despite being a box office success because the costs were so astronomical. But perhaps the greatest cost was to Richard and Elizabeth themselves, because what started as passionate recognition became mutual destruction. They married in 1964, 9 days after Richard's divorce from Sybil was finalized. For 10 years, they were the most famous couple in the world. They made 11 films together. They fought publicly and dramatically. Richard's drinking escalated. Elizabeth's pill use increased. They divorced in 1974, She remarried in 1975 and divorced again in 1976. Years later, Richard would say, "You can't keep clapping a couple of sticks of dynamite together without expecting them to blow up." Elizabeth would say, "Richard was the love of my life, but we were too much alike, two volcanoes living in the same house." But all of that, the marriages and divorces, the scandals and heartbreak, the passion and destruction, all of it traced back to that moment on the Cleopatra set. To Richard Burton, watching Elizabeth Taylor grieve as Cleopatra and seeing her grieve as herself. To 4 words whispered to a director, "I have to have her." Those 4 words weren't about possession, though they sounded like it. They were about recognition. About a man who'd spent his life feeling like a fraud, seeing genuine emotion and being unable to look away. About an actor who valued talent above everything, witnessing a performance so raw it shattered his defenses. About a human being seeing another human being's pain and understanding it completely. Joseph Mankiewicz, who heard those 4 words, said years later, "In that moment, I knew we weren't just making a movie anymore. We were documenting the beginning of something extraordinary and terrible." Richard didn't choose to fall for Elizabeth. He recognized her. And once you truly recognize someone, you can't unknown them. Richard Burton died in 1984, at 58 years old, his body destroyed by decades of heavy drinking. His last wife found a letter in his belongings written to Elizabeth but never sent. It read, "You were the only woman who ever understood me, the only one who saw past the performance to the scared Welsh boy underneath. I have to have you, I said that day in Rome. I was right. I had to have you, and I did. And it destroyed us both. But I'd do it all again." Elizabeth Taylor kept that letter until her death in 2011. She told her family to bury it with her, because some loves are too big for one lifetime. Some connections are so deep that even death can't sever them. And some moments, like Richard Burton watching Elizabeth Taylor act for the first time, change the course of multiple lives in ways that echo for decades. The 4 words Richard Burton said that day in Rome weren't just about him and Elizabeth. They were about all of us, about the moment when we see someone and know with absolute certainty that our life will never be the same, about recognition so complete it feels like coming home, about passion so intense it doesn't matter if it destroys you because at least you felt something real. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold Hollywood stories. And tell us in the comments, do you believe some people are destined to meet even if that meeting changes everything? Richard Burton had to have Elizabeth Taylor, and he did, and it cost them both everything. But in those moments when they were together, truly together, they were more alive than most people ever are. They burned bright enough to light up the world. And when they burned out, the ashes scattered across Hollywood history. A reminder that some loves are too big to contain, too powerful to survive, and too important to regret. The movie was Cleopatra. The scene was Caesar's death. The moment was when Richard Burton saw Elizabeth Taylor not as a Hollywood star, but as a fellow wounded soul, and 4 words changed everything. I have to have her. Sometimes, the greatest love stories are also the greatest tragedies. Sometimes having someone means losing everything else. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's worth it.